Dear all, I want to welcome you all at our event, The Borders from Within, the EU External Borders, a mirror to European migration policies. My name is Diana Radoslavova, chairperson of Center for Legal Aid Voice in Bulgaria, the organization that has the pleasure to host this event. The event itself is organized with the support of the Bulgarian Women Fund, with the project Birds in BG, and just in a minute, in the first chat comment, I will send you a detailed explanation about the project, and you can be introduced to it. As announced, the event will be held in English with no additional translation provided, and the event is recorded. In the beginning, I would like to remind everyone the well-known rules for the smooth running for online events. I ask you during the presentations to stay with your cameras and mics turned off so that to avoid additional noises. Substantial part of the event after the presentations will be an open discussion. So if you want to take the floor, please give the signal with the raised hand icon. For an internal record of the event, I will ask everyone to take time and in the chat to write the name and the organization or the institution which he is representing. And again, I thank you for your patience and understanding with the technicalities. The four speakers of our event are representatives of 4 countries from the expanded so-called Balkan region, Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Turkey, that are placed at the both sides of the EU, external and internal. Why borders? Because EU external borders have become the most discussed topic in regards to migration management during the last decade, absorbing majority of focus, legislative amendments, human resources, and funding. Situations at the borders demonstrate with biggest clarity the radical shift in the EU and national migration policies, such as restriction of irregular migration, forcible returns, and externalization, which prevail way over the need of protection, solidarity in crisis, humanitarian mobilization, or integration. The time that we hold this event is also very strategic. On one side, we are just a month away from the deadline of presenting the national plans of all EU countries for the implementation of the recently adopted EU Pact on Migration and Asylum. The pact itself is a highly criticized, complicated, and controversial piece of legislation. The implementation, as feedback from the EU countries, have been going on in astonishing shadow and exclusion of the civil society actors from the discussions and the creation process. On the other hand, Schengen area is expanding and shaking at the same time. Just a week ago, Bulgaria and Romania were fully accepted members of the Schengen area after showing good results on officially reducing numbers of irregular entries at the cost of increased numbers of human rights violations. The step is accomplished at a time when France temporarily reinstated border controls with its immediate neighbors for 6 months from November due to security threats and illegal migration, and Netherlands will impose border control from 9th December for the same reasons. Last but not least, externalization policies are once again questions with the series of judicial bans from Italian courts of Italy, Albania deal, and the recent critics of the European Ombudsman against the silence of the Commission about the its human rights inquiry findings prior to signing its migration deal with Tunisia back in July 2023. These are just very small pieces of the big discussion of externalization topic that we will touch a little more later. With no due delay, I will proceed with the presentation from the four speakers. Discussions, I remind, will be open at the end of all four presentations, but meanwhile, if you have questions, you can write them in the chat, and as the presentations go on, we will have administrator monitoring the chat, and we will start discussions with the written questions. I will give now the floor first to Desislava Tudorova. Desislava Tudorova will cover the situation in Bulgaria. She has been working with the Center for Legal Aid Voice in Bulgaria since 2017. She has extensive experience as a lawyer and advocacy expert on issues of asylum and migration. Desislava has academic and professional experience from Germany, UK, Israel. She has also been the only representative of the civil society acting on behalf of Border Violence Monitoring Network at a very recent hearing in the LIBE Committee on assessment of the Bulgaria and Romania pilot projects with the EU. Desi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Diana. As Diana mentioned, in May 2024, the EU finally adopted the Pact on Migration and Asylum, setting new rules about migration management and establishing a common asylum system. It must become fully operational by June 2026. The European Commission has adopted a common implementation plan for the Pact. This plan sets out the key actions required to implement the newly adopted rules. EU member states are now expected to prepare their national implementation plans by the coming December. There are voices arguing that there is too much fuss around the Pact because it integrates old familiar practices. Still, the new Pact creates an important context for Bulgaria, as the country represents one of the longest EU external borders. In the wake of the new EU Pact, Bulgaria was busy with political drama around joining the Schengen area. For its Schengen accession, Bulgaria was put under much pressure both at national and EU level to curb migration. Keeping the border tight was the primary goal and the exclusive condition. In March 2023, the European Commission launched a 6-month pilot project with Bulgaria on preventing irregular arrivals. The EU insisted that the pilot project had nothing to do with the new pact. Still, within the pilot, Bulgaria tested accelerated procedures at a transit center close to the Bulgarian-Turkish border. This year, the pilot project grew to cooperation framework signed with the European Commission. The framework was, among others, defined as starting preparations to implement the new pact on migration and asylum in Bulgaria. We are approaching the deadline for the national implementation plan, maybe to be announced, maybe to be published. We can only hypothesize as the working process around the pilot project and the national implementation plan has failed to include the civil society, such as NGOs and experts on the ground. No independent assessment has been made available if the pilot project met the standards of migrants' fundamental rights, access to basic services, and access to legal aid. The projects within the European Commissions were revised exclusively from the perspective of their capabilities to limit migration and secure the border. According to the latest Bulgarian border enforcement statistics, some more 50,000 third country nationals were apprehended during their attempt to irregularly cross the border for the period between January and October this year. The statistics say that around 48,000 of them voluntarily left and returned to the neighboring countries. No authority can give explanations grounded in facts and expertise what voluntary leave means here. No authority could confirm if this kind of apprehension and border security complies with human rights law and fundamental asylum principles. And here we go again, talking about the need of independent human rights monitoring on the international borders. Last year, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted resolution followed by a call for establishing an international and independent monitoring mechanism to address human rights violations in transit. The realities on the ground, however, show that the existing monitoring is far from enough because it has no leverage to investigate legally sanctioned rights violations and enforce accountability. And instead of improving human rights mechanisms, the EU envisions no material consequences for human rights violations. What the new EU Pact offers to fundamental rights is far from enough to respond to the challenges on the ground and change the realities on the ground. We can produce billions of lengthy and highly intellectual discussions about the need of the independent monitoring mechanisms, but there will be no material consequence if these mechanisms have no leverage. Instead, the border control becomes a maze of various national border guard units and Frontex. It makes it more difficult to identify and locate responsibility for human rights violations. The current border management tends to blur accountability. Policies of tightening the borders exacerbates the humanitarian situation of people on the move and spike the numbers of those who die on their way to Europe. The institutions abdicate from searching and rescuing migrants, providing life-saving assistance to them, recovering and identifying dead bodies. No institution takes responsibility for these cases, leaving NGOs, hospitals, officers working on the ground to deal alone with the crisis. If there is no institutional response to this and no support for rescuing mechanism, Europe could well be on the brink of a bigger crisis. As an overall effect, the EU seals itself off through externalization, also by making certain concepts more elastic, like the concept of safe third country, or designating third countries as safe countries of origin. In the last month, in Bulgaria, there is a rising trend of rejecting applications for international protections from Syrian citizens, among others on the ground that parts of Syria could be considered as safe. In a very recent decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union, this is a case from the Czech Republic, the court, however, highlights that EU law does not allow member states to designate a third country as a safe country of origin, just like that, where these parts of its territory do not satisfy the legal material conditions of being safe. Scrolling down the package of new migration rules, from the perspective of the realities on the external borders, in the new EU Pact pop up the following concerns. First, enabling unlimited and unchecked discretion of authorities. Second, disabling judicial control, legal remedies, and enforceable accountability mechanisms. Third, risk of obstructing or blocking access to legal aid and other basic services. And last but definitely not least, insufficient safeguards for children. Bulgaria is a hotspot regarding migration flows as one of the longest and most complicated EU external land borders. It still remains a blind spot regarding its realities on the ground. But given the newly adopted EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, it seems that blind spots become convenient for externalizing the asylum procedure, turning the external borders in third countries to the EU doorkeepers, passing the responsibility for human rights violations like PIMBOs back and forth between national and European institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Desi, for this overview of the situation in Bulgaria, which, as explained by you, definitely is a hotspot and unfortunately a blind spot both for national and international institutions. Thank you also for reminding us that looking ahead from where we are already now, we need to emphasize the need of efficient monitoring, support of redress mechanisms, and rescue operations. We need also to strengthen the adequacy of the asylum assessment and the asylum procedure, which unfortunately Bulgaria still has a way to go. With this, we will go to the second part of our discussion, which will focus on Bulgarian-Serbian border, very much overlooked also in terms of policies, practices, and legal trends. Mrs. Milica Svabic is a lawyer from the Serbian NGO Click Active. She will share her insights and analysis on the Serbian jurisdiction. For years, Click Active is committed to directly support people on the move and asylum seekers in Serbia. Milica, welcome to the floor, please.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me and see me well. First of all, thank you for inviting me to speak to this panel. As you said, I work for an NGO called Click Active. We provide free legal and psychosocial support to people on the move in Serbia. We are mostly present on the Serbian north borders, but also to a significant extent, we're trying to monitor Serbian south borders. Maybe for people who are not so familiar with the context of the so-called Balkan refugee route, Serbia is one of the final countries on the Balkan route, which is a non-EU and non-Schengen country. So currently the most used route, at least for what we hear and see from people who arrive in Serbia, is that most people arrive to Turkey, then they go to Bulgaria, then Serbia. And then from Serbia, the route goes in two directions. One is to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then Croatia and further to the west. And the second route leads from Serbia to Hungary, Austria, and then further to other countries of the European Union. The situation in Serbia is constantly changing. It's changing quite drastically, I would say, in all aspects on the ground. What is happening, what are the policies and the practices of state institutions and authorities, how the route is changing, the involvement of smuggling and criminal groups on the network, the profile of the people that we see on the ground. So things are quite rapidly changing. As I mentioned, Serbia is not part of the EU and it's not part of the Schengen area. So the new pact and the changes of the Schengen code will not directly influence Serbia. However, Serbia is a candidate country to join the European Union, and therefore indirectly both of these legislation changes will actually affect Serbia quite drastically. Within the new pact, EU also presented the action plan for the Western Balkan countries, which is in a way addition to the new pact, showing how Western Balkan countries, including Serbia, will be a beneficial partner to the EU when it comes to migration issues and asylum. For now, Serbia definitely has been a good partner to the EU when it comes to playing as a buffer zone on the Balkan refugee route. Serbia serves as a dumping zone for the countries on the north borders, for Croatia and Hungary and Romania, who have been over the past years pushing people back to Serbia, very often with the extensive use of violence and humiliation, but also with the readmission agreement that Serbia has signed with the EU countries in 2007, which is also quite, the use of this readmission agreement has drastically increased. The readmission agreement, what we see in practice, is practically just a legalized way to put people back from the EU territory back to Serbia. Also, besides serving as a dumping zone, Serbia is also placed as a buffer for the EU. So in the last year, but also a bit longer, we see quite extensive pushbacks and violence happening on the Serbian south borders. More and more people are reporting to be pushed back from Serbia back to Bulgaria, but also from Serbia back to North Macedonia. And as in other borders, Serbian police is also using quite extensive violence and humiliation tactics in order to deter people from retrying to enter Serbia. Serbian government has also quite drastically changed its narrative for what we see in the last several months, let's say in the last year. Until a year ago, Serbian government was using the narrative that we are a transit country and nobody wants to stay in Serbia. And therefore, they were using this narrative of having a transit camps, of serving only as a transit country, and therefore just providing people with bare minimum in the so-called transit camps. However, this narrative is no longer being used by the Serbian government. In the last several months, most of these so-called transit camps are now closed, saying that there is no more need to have them open because Serbia is doing an effective job in preventing people from actually entering Serbia, meaning that the pushback and the violence on the south border has increased. In the period from January until the end of October this year, around 16,400 people were accommodated in Serbia camps, which is a drop of around 75% compared to the same period last year. Also, in the same period, the Serbian police registered only a bit more than 700 people for asylum, and 172 people actually submitted asylum application. Only 6 people were granted asylum, and 77 people were rejected for asylum. The figures are very, very low, and they don't actually present the accurate situation on the ground. It's not entirely true that the number of people on the move has decreased. It's actually quite the opposite. The number of the people on the move is probably the same or even bigger than it was last year. The thing that changes is that people are no longer visible. They are now afraid to go to the police, to turn to the official state institutions, to go to the camps because of these pushbacks, because of the violence, because they know that they will not get access to asylum and protection in Serbia. So actually people have no other choice but to turn to smugglers and criminal groups. They no longer use smugglers only to help them cross the state border, but they also use smugglers to move around the territory of Serbia, to be accommodated in private apartments, private houses, which puts people in quite severe danger from different types of exploitation, primarily sexual and labor exploitation, but also quite severe forms of human trafficking. What we hear and see on the ground is that the prices for crossing through the Balkan refugee route has drastically increased. What we hear from people is that now they pay between 7,000 and 10,000 euros to go from Turkey to Serbia, and then they pay additional 3,000 to 4,000 euros to go from Serbia to the countries in the Western Europe. This is probably 4 times higher prices than they were, let's say, 2 years ago. Of course, many people are not able to pay these high prices, so then they are being exploited by smugglers and criminal groups, where they have to either work for smugglers or provide different types of services to them in order to pay off their debt. And this is actually quite contrary to what we hear from Serbian state institutions and for what we hear from the EU officials, who are constantly claiming that they are actually fighting against the smugglers, that there are more arrests of smugglers and breakages of these criminal groups, but in reality, we see the opposite effect happening on the ground. The smugglers and criminal groups became more strong. They are now transnational networks which go from the country of origin all the way to the country of destination. They are not used just for crossing the borders, but also helping people to stay and move on the territory of Serbia. Smugglers are the ones who are actually deciding through which countries people will go, how will they cross the border, how long will they stay in each country, and actually what will be the destination country. I know that the timing is quite limited, so I want also just to mention one more quite important thing. We also see very significant increase in the number of people who are gone missing on the route, and also a quite significant increase in the number of people who are dying on the Balkan refugee route. One of the most significant death and missing spot is actually the border between Bulgaria and Serbia. There is the Old Mountain or Balkan Mountain, which is quite dangerous route to cross on foot, especially during the winter time, because there is very few villages and very few roads that lead across this mountain. This is one of the border where we get, as I mentioned, a lot of pushbacks. There is a presence on Frontex on both sides of the borders. So actually we're collecting quite significant number of testimonies of people saying that they either lost members of their groups, or that they encountered people who were sick, or even dead bodies on this mountain as they were trying to cross the border on their own. The Serbian Police Administration for City Pirot, which is in charge of this border, reported at the end of last year that only in the previous year they found more than 100 bodies that's suspected to be people on the move who were crossing this border. And in this year, the number probably will be bigger for what we can see and hear from people on the move who are crossing the border. I think that probably my timing is now up, so I will leave the floor for the next speaker, but of course I'm open to all of the questions, so feel free either to type them in the chat or to ask them after the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Milica. It's really disturbing, the very dynamic changes in practice and narrative, as you mentioned, that are going on in Serbia, and that we definitely need to follow intensively. Thank you for mentioning about the problems on the Bulgarian and Serbian border, which unfortunately is not monitored officially the way that it is Bulgarian and Turkish border. Thank you for reminding us that everywhere, unfortunately, the official statistics that are dropping about people on the move do not reflect realities. They just impose invisibility, increase of danger, and price of criminal activities. I guess there will be a lot of questions, so again remind you that you can write your questions as the presentation go on in the chat so that we can follow on them. I also remind you, for those of you who haven't done so, to write your names and the organizations and institutions that you present. With this, I will give the floor to the next speaker, which is Mrs. Juliette Malfaison. She is founder and director of the Greek organization Equal Legal Aid, and she will share insights and strategic case law concerning Greece. Equal Legal Aid is a non-profit providing pro bono legal assistance to asylum seekers and migrants, including through representation before Greek courts and strategic litigation. The experience of Greece is vital, as in many aspects it serves as a base of the new EU Pact. Milica, please welcome. Juliette, sorry, excuse me, Juliette, you're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Right.
I hope everybody can hear me well. Thank you very much, Diana and Daisy, for organizing this event. So today I would like to speak a little bit about the current situation in Greece and what it means for organizations that are providing legal assistance to asylum seekers, and then quickly circle back to the pact. So as Diana just explained, we are an organization that is based on mainland Greece, in northern Greece precisely, and we are assisting asylum seekers in their asylum procedures and providing court representation. So the situation right now is really challenging in Greece. Greece is one of the first countries of entry for a lot of applicants for international protection, and the system currently lies 5 reception centers that are located on the islands and 3 reception centers that are on the mainland. This means that everybody, or more or less every people that applies for asylum in Greece, is detained or de facto detained for an amount of time that can vary depending on the situation. So this by itself is the source of a lot of issues for asylum seekers, but also for organizations that are trying to support them. In terms of the conditions in those reception centers, they are extremely dire despite the gigantic amount of money that have been invested. In the north of Greece, where we operate, there are 15 refugee camps, which is a very high number, and it's not even comprising the camps that are elsewhere in Greece, in the Attica region, closer to Athens, or on the islands. Currently, for people to access reception conditions, they need to be accommodated in a refugee camp, which means, in other words, that to access cash assistance, medical care, food distribution, or NFI distribution, they need to accept to be located in one of those facilities, which can be fully closed centers or semi-closed centers. This is causing a lot of issues, like I previously mentioned, for the people themselves, but also for the organizations. Basically, that they have very little access to the outside and to services. So it also comprises essential services such as access to legal assistance, access to long-term medical care, or psychosocial support. And this is a problem that is being aggravated by a number of factors. One of them being that in Greece, in order to enter one of those facilities, you need to have an accreditation, which very few NGOs and organizations actually have. Another issue is that there are less and less organizations providing such services, especially on the mainland. And the last problem that is aggravating this lack of access or difficulty accessing services is that those camps usually are extremely isolating. These are very remote facilities, and it's difficult for people inside to even just take a bus and leave them. So in general, access to very vital things are extremely hindered in Greece. In terms of asylum and the asylum procedure, the situation is not better. Currently, we are facing a number of very problematic issues. One of them being that there is no interpretation services in front of the asylum office, and this has been going on since May, which means in practice that actually nothing is happening when it comes to asylum. There are no interviews taking place. People cannot have access to very basic information about their case or about the asylum procedure in Greece. And lately, it has even been extremely difficult, if not impossible, to even lodge an asylum application. So this is, I would say, the main issue at the moment that everybody's facing. Another more long-term issue is the abusive use of the safe third country concept when it comes to Turkey, and the concept of the safe country of origin, which currently concerns, if I'm not mistaken, 16 countries, for which there is a very high presumption that people do not really have a claim if they originate from these countries, which means in practice that there is a very high number of asylum applications that are rejected without ever being heard. Then, just to wrap up on the situation about asylum, there is also an excessive use of detention of third country nationals in pre-removal detention centers and also in Greek prison accused of smuggling. We have seen a very big increase of people being accused of smuggling because they were boat drivers or even car drivers at the land border. And this despite the fact that there are no tangible prospects of returns or readmissions. Then to just finish, there are also a lot of pushbacks at the sea and land border, which has been a constant struggle since now, I think since I started to work in Greece in 2018, and it has only gone worse and worse. As an organization, like I was mentioning, we are facing a lot of constraints due to all of these factors. We have a problem of access to those remote facilities, which we are trying to overcome by having more outreach activities, having a hotline. So we are working remotely a lot, which is certainly not ideal when you're providing legal assistance to asylum seekers. We also are facing a problem of very high demand for legal assistance. Because the asylum system itself is completely blocked or even broken. At the same time, state-funded legal aid is not really functioning, and the cost of representation in court is really high in Greece. And all of this is definitely having an impact on access to legal remedies for asylum seekers, despite the fact that they are rejected in very large numbers. In terms of the procedures themselves and our work as lawyers, we have to handle a lot of admissibility procedures based on the safe third country concept, a lot of accelerated procedures, and all of this is just making the work of lawyers much more difficult. So now I will quickly circle back to the pact itself in just a couple of minutes, because I think my time is almost up. I wanted to remind all of those aspects of the Greek concept, because Greece is actually used as an example, as a model example for the pact itself. And all of the features, or most of the features that we see in the pact, have already been implemented in Greece for many years, such as screening at the borders, triage at the border, admissibility procedures, the extensive use of accelerated procedures with a very sad consequences that we know too well in Greece. I would say that the basis of this system is biased, it's flawed, because it relies on the premise that migration flows are predictable and or steady, which is absolutely not the case. So if you put everybody in closed facilities at the borders, necessarily you will face huge problems whenever there is an influx in arrivals, which is not linked to our wish or desires as EU countries. It's just geopolitical, and we do not control that. So in general, the example of Greece is there is absolutely nothing good that can be taken out of it, but it is still used as the basis of the pact. Thankfully, we as organizations, we've not been sitting on our hands for the past let's say 8 years. So there's been a lot of attempts in courts to address certain issues, including the safe third country concept and admissibility procedures, accelerated procedure, the burden of proof, access to legal remedies. So there is a lot of case law. There is a lot of case law in domestic courts, also in EU courts. And we should really aim at making this available to other practitioners all over Europe to pave the way to, let's say, the resistance to the pact and its consequences on asylum seekers. I think my time is up. I'm looking forward to the questions, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you also, Juliet, for describing, unfortunately, this very strange paradox about the failure of the experiment made with Greece, and still this model being used as the basis of the new rules that we all will expect to see in our countries very soon, and in some of them they're already on the move. Thank you for reminding us the importance of the legal aid and the restrictions that it's getting in Greece, because legal aid is the main guarantee not only for human rights, but also for the democratic society itself. And this is very dangerous tendency. And I remain with the sound of your words that the basis of a good system is a balance. And is it possible to be reached at the point that where we are? Thank you once again. With this, I will pass to the last but not least, the final panelist in our presentation. This is Mrs. Oyuk Tümer Esen. She is the director of Refugee Rights Turkey. She holds a bachelor degree in political science and master degree in sociology, working in the asylum and migration field for 13 years. Mrs. Oyuk will share insight, challenges, and current trends in Turkey, especially in light of externalization policies, reminding ourselves that Turkey is #1 refugee hosting country in the world and just immediate neighbor of the EU. Oyuk, please, you are welcome to present, and please, you can open your PowerPoint presentation as well.
Hello, everyone. So, first of all, I would like to thank the Voice in Bulgaria team for organizing this important event, and all the distinguished guest speakers who joined the conversation. As NGOs operating in countries with different levels of opportunities and challenges, we see once again that we have many common issues, and therefore it's essential for us and for the communities we support that we communicate more closely and regularly. So my name is Öykü, and I've been working with Refugee Rights Turkey team for over 10 years now, and I hope I will share reflections from Turkey, hopefully in 10 minutes today. So the migration and asylum issue in Turkey cannot be considered independent of its location. Turkey is situated between countries of origin and target for migrants, and therefore Turkey is affected by developments on the ground in these countries. We are all aware of EU's policies on the one hand, and on the other, we also know that political, social, economic instabilities in the region continues, and this has effects on migratory trends. And we are also all aware that ongoing conflicts and wars lead more and more people to be displaced, and thousands of people are being forcefully displaced as a result of these developments. In Turkey, we have a very complex and dynamic reality in terms of migration and asylum. Turkey is a refugee and migrant producing country, but also Turkey is a host and transit country for migrants. Currently, there is over 1 million persons, foreigners, staying in Turkey with residence permit. Another 3 million asylum seekers, Syrians under temporary protection, mostly Afghan, Iran, Iraq nationalities under international protection. And Turkey, as a transit country, yearly almost 250,000 yearly apprehensions, so making Turkey as a major transit country as well. And this requires us to talk about individuals and communities with different needs, motivations, and vulnerabilities. And it's a huge challenge to identify, differentiate, support, and provide the protection refugees need in each individual cases. Yet we should also bear in mind that Turkey is also has a much stronger state capacity compared to other major refugee hosting countries, especially in the global south. It's a country that is also a signatory of many fundamental international conventions and a founding member of various international organizations. However, there are also serious challenges that need to be highlighted. The most important one is that Turkey, for almost a decade, is #1 refugee hosting country. In addition, as I just mentioned, Turkey is also a site for irregular migration, which puts the country's already strained protection capacity under further pressure. And finally, it shouldn't be forgotten that currently Turkey is facing major economic challenges as well, and different than from maybe European context. As a result, there is a shared poverty among Turkish citizens and refugee communities. And this lowers, on the one hand, this lowers the standard of living for everyone, but on the other, this is also paving the way for the rise and legitimation of anti-refugee sentiments in the mainstream. And as a major challenge, maybe we should also name EU's migration policies, migration and asylum policies. As I mentioned in the beginning, these policies have a direct impact on Turkey. The EU's goal is very clear, as amply summarized in the term Fortress Europe. So no one should cross its borders. So this policy, named as externalization, in other words, a policy to shift the primary burden to others. And there are different instruments to implement this policy. So one key instrument is higher level of investment on border security. Another one is signing readmission agreements with the neighboring countries. So in case, by chance, some refugees manage to cross the border, they can be effectively and promptly sent back to neighboring countries. And EU-Turkey statement is also should be considered in this context. So although this deal, the 2016 deal, looks like a typical readmission cooperation, actually number of individuals who are readmitted to Turkey are approximately 3,000 in total. So therefore, this is not mostly for readmission, but rather for decreasing number of arrivals to the EU. And as a result, we know, and I will show you some numbers in a minute, numbers of arrivals significantly dropped after the signature of this deal. And another instrument is channeling funds. So in the Turkey context, for instance, EU is channeling funding, especially cash-based, cash assistance type programs. And the aim is to actually prevent onward movements of already existing refugee population settled in Turkey or other neighboring countries. So are these policies are working? For the vantage point of EU, if I have to start, I should say yes and no. So yes, in short and mid-term, but I must say no in the long term. Yes, it prevents a large portion of new arrivals. So this on one hand, as you can see, numbers actually dropped drastically. But no, because it's clearly these policies are not sustainable. As I mentioned earlier, this mobility will not diminish until the ongoing crisis in the countries of origin are resolved. So raising those barriers are merely a delaying and postponing tactic. In addition, it doesn't improve the protection of migrants and asylum seekers. So as you can see here, numbers have decreased in one route, while the other route is still booming. New migration routes are constantly emerging, and refugees consider these new routes. As a result, there is not change in the maybe in the big picture. And previous commentators, they also shared that those figures, we should have questions about those figures reflected. So those are, for instance, Frontex figures. So we should also have maybe a question mark regarding those numbers shared. As also mentioned previously, are borders more secure? So this, we always discuss the securitization of borders. Are borders more secure? Unfortunately not. So smuggling continues. And the only difference is that it's now more expensive and more dangerous. Pushback incidents continue to be reported. And there are more and more reports of gang violence in border areas, which wasn't an issue before. In other words, these policies have made border areas much more insecure for asylum seekers and migrants. And yet, migrants and asylum seekers also are aware of all these developments. So they are informed, and they have concerns, they are afraid, but still they take their chance. So they continue to try to cross to EU. And this is the reason why I don't find these measures sustainable in the long term. And finally, from Turkey vantage point, are these EU migration policies successful? I should say that they are not. This resulted in Turkey's assuming a really big portion of EU's responsibilities and for a very long time. This really needs to be seen and understood by European stakeholders. And this situation now is not sustainable anymore for Turkey. And in this respect, Turkey, as a response, has started to adopt a policy similar to EU's policy through different instruments. Although in Turkey context, the need for security measures is understandable, Turkey is currently investing more and more in its border security rather than in protection measures or building institutional capacities. And another critical issue is Turkey's decision to use more and more voluntary repatriation programs as an implementation tool for its own externalization policy. Fast and effective voluntary repatriation programs are being very much promoted. And since this aligns with EU's externalization policy, we can foresee that it will continue in the near future. But is this a long-term solution? As I mentioned earlier, as long as problems and conflicts in the countries of origin are not terminated, I really don't think so. As it was mentioned regarding legal aid, I also wanted to share some and finalize my presentation with this. I believe this is an example really illustrating my points. So Turkey currently has 32 removal centers all across Turkey with a capacity of over 80,000 detention capacity. And these are, as you know, are funded with contribution of EU and some member states or other countries. So, and according to EU report on Turkey 2023 report, the number of people who met with their lawyers in removal centers is 24,000, and approximately an additional 1,000 people benefited from free of charge legal aid services. So although these numbers seem real big, as I mentioned, Turkey is apprehending yearly over 250,000 people. So if we don't have statistics as per how many detention cases per year we have. If we take this 250,000 number, so it's, we should say, like approximately less than 15% of people in removal centers at least, had access to legal representation, legal assistance, and very few, the ratio for free of charge legal assistance is even smaller. So I think this is a striking example that shows the priorities and how resources are allocated in this context. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Uyuk, for picturing so well the situation, the numbers, the statistics about Turkey that speak so much. Turkey is considered as a secure third country in all EU countries in terms of asylum seekers. At the same time, we see the securitization of the borders that are prioritized not only on the internal part of the EU, but also at the external, how this is efficient probably for short term, but how problematic it might be for long-term purposes. And also for the need of EU to make its proper analysis on the situation in terms of funding, very important, and its externalization policies towards third countries. With this, our official 4 presentation from the panelists are completed, and we will open now the discussion. I remind you that if you have a question, you can just use the raised hand icon, and when you take the floor, please put on your camera and represent yourself before presenting your question. We don't see any questions in the chat, so the floor is open of everyone present who has a question. There is one question only about whether the recording will be shared of the event. The recording will be shared in the beginning of next week in the social media of Center for Legal Aid Voice in Bulgaria and probably all the rest of the organizations of the speakers. If you want to receive personally copy of the recording, you can also write down your email address in the chat. So please, if any question is available, I don't see any hand raised. The presentations were extremely detailed, professional, and I think raising very important issues.
I can also remind you that you are also invited to share insights from your own experience. So you're very welcome to do this. Maybe I can kick off the floor for questions, please. And just for you to follow the example. I have a question to Milica, the colleague from Serbia. Serbia has signed an agreement with Frontex. Milica, can you share with us some insights about it and what is the role of Frontex now in Serbia?
Yes, so Serbia signed the first agreement with Frontex in 2019. Soon after, it was adopted by the national parliament, and in 2021, the first Frontex officers came to Serbia. They were actually appointed to work at the Serbian-Bulgarian border at first. Then, over time, they also became present on the Serbian north borders, especially at the border with Hungary, which was the most active border. Now, when the new pact for migration and asylum was presented together with the action plan for the Western Balkan, one of the points of this action plan is for all Western Balkan countries to sign new agreement with Frontex or to sign the agreement with Frontex for the first time for the countries that didn't have it before. So in June this year, Serbia signed new agreement with Frontex, which is actually being adopted by the parliament in Serbia today. The new agreement will give Frontex officers more authorities. The first agreement exclusively said that Frontex officers can work in Serbia only together with the Serbian border police, and now this will change. Officially, they're still obligated to work together with Serbian police officers, but the new agreement also says that if the Serbian government gives them authorization, they can also work independently and on their own. Unfortunately, the agreement itself doesn't give us much information about the Frontex activities in Serbia, neither the first one or the second one. Both agreements are calling upon the operational plan of Frontex, where the specific activities and their role in the country should be specified. Last year, we requested this operational plan from Frontex, based on the request for the access of public data. We got the copy of it. However, I would say that more than 90% of the text is covered, so you cannot see it. They were calling upon the confidentiality. So we are actually not informed and not able to be informed about Frontex activities in Serbia. We also requested their incident report. So Frontex officers are obligated to report to the headquarters of any incident happening on the ground. And this was also quite disappointing because for the first 2-3 years of their work, there were less than 10 incident reports, I think 5 or 6, and most of them are just some relatively minor incidents. None of the incidents involved actually the work of Serbian border police or Frontex officers in direct work on the field with people on the move. So I'm not sure if we will actually get any useful information from them and what actually their role is. There was also quite big incident when The Guardian reported the video recordings of the mass pushback happening from Serbia back to North Macedonia between villages Miratovac and Lojane. Probably everybody saw it, but just in a short, the video shows people being dressed naked and returning from direction of Serbia towards North Macedonia. Serbian police said that they don't have any recordings of this incident. However, this is one of the main roads that leads from North Macedonia to Serbia. There is quite a lot of presence of Frontex in this area, but also the presence of foreign police, especially Hungary and Austria, that Serbia has a trilateral agreement with. So it is quite difficult to believe that Frontex is not at least aware of this practice happening on the Serbian south borders. But we will see now also after today and after the new agreement is ratified by the Serbian parliament, how the situation will change on the ground.
Thank you, Milica.
Thank you, Milica. I really think the role of Frontex is getting stronger, and we need to learn, be more and more educated how we can hold the Frontex authorities responsible, because there are very specific instruments that can be used for that. In that regard, I will just share the news, the very recent news from Bulgaria, that after the accession to Schengen was announced, Bulgarian government also announced that 100 border police officers from Romania, Hungary, and Austria will be deployed to guard Bulgaria's border with Turkey after the country has joined the Schengen area. So the numbers, the responsibilities and the authorities of Frontex officers definitely is getting higher everywhere.
I think we have a question in the chat.
Oh,
Is
we
the
have?
criminalization? Yes, you can.
There is one question from Nicole Kolitor. Is the criminalization of solidarity increasing in the last year? So I guess this is question towards 4 panelists. So is the criminalization of solidarity connected to big degree of criminalization of migrants and migration itself increasing in Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, or Turkey? Any one of the panelists who would like to touch on this issue?
Maybe if the colleagues want to refer to this. I definitely, on our part, see a risk of increasing criminalization. Not that that was an easy job. It's never been. But what we can report is certain normalization of certain practices. So it becomes more normal to criminalize work with migrants. We can share that especially in the last months and year, no one make any distinction, even in the language, between illegal or irregular migration. If we see the media reports in Bulgaria as well, the topic and the issue is always framed as illegal. And so we always have to start from zero, from the scratch, just to remind that crossing the borders irregularly is not a crime according to the law.
I maybe just touch on one just sign about the increase of the criminalization. Very important changes in the Bulgarian Criminal Code were made also during this year, in which any assistance without connected it with monetary financial benefit, but any assistance for crossing or staying in the country is considered smuggling and criminalized under the Bulgarian Criminal Code, which is different from the way that it is stated before. And we have disturbing practices of arrests that have been performed during the last 2 months. 12 cases we have been signalized about arrests of people who have been assisting with rescue missions at the Bulgarian-Turkish border. So I think criminalization is something of solidarity will be something that we will face much more in the next year and the years to come. It will be interesting if Juliet, yeah, please. Juliet, yes.
Yes. So I would say that definitely it is increasing, but it does not necessarily take a single shape. It can take many shapes, actually. So just to give a few examples, for instance, there was a change in criminal law around fake news in Greece, I think a couple of years ago, maybe 1 year and a half ago. And this, for instance, increases the risk of criminalization for organizations that denounce certain actions on their social media or their website or in reports. So it means that we really, really need to be extra careful with the words we are using, the source that we are quoting, etc., etc. Another very big risk of criminalization is actually an administrative risk. around tax law, labor law, how well we comply to very basic administrative rules. And then there is, of course, the criminalization of the actions themselves. And there's been quite a lot of very mediatic cases. Again, like Diana was just mentioning, for search and rescue, for instance, people that have been involved in search and rescue operations. And finally, the last thing I wanted to mention is the anti-NGO rhetoric, which is very, very strong in Greece and is fueled by politicians and public personnel. So it's complicated, to sum up.
Definitely complicated. I wonder whether Milica or Uyuk would like to share about Serbia or Turkey on the question about criminalization of solidarity.
In Turkey, I know that there is this criminalization in Greece and in Italy and other countries, but in Turkey, no, we don't have that type of a criminalization.
Thank you. Oyuk?
Yeah, I also have to say that for Serbia, so far, this hasn't been a problem. Providing any sort of assistance, whether legal aid, psychological aid, providing NFI or any other services to people on the move is not criminalized by law. It's only criminalized if you assist somebody to stay on the Serbian territory or cross the border, and if you do it in exchange for financial gain. But providing assistance as an NGO or volunteers or citizens of Serbia, it hasn't been criminalized so far. So we hope that this will remain the same in the future. So the criminalization of solidarity is not an issue for us here.
Thank you, Milica. Really interesting. It looks like criminalization of solidarity is very much connected with EU policies and getting challenging for EU countries. We know that currently are reopened the discussion about the facilitation directive. So a lot is going on at EU level on that.
And we have in the chat a question about a very trending topic. What's the situation on AI being used to racially profile asylum residence applicants? Maybe I can start that. I'd like to remind about this, what the other colleagues also mentioned, that we see a significant shift of capacities to securitization of the borders, also through technical capacities and surveillance capacities. And it's a really disturbing trend regarding that. On the other hand, the civil society and also OIQ mentioned for Turkey programs, social programs, integration programs, healthcare programs, this whole civil society area is remaining quite skinny in contrast to the technical capacities that have been shifted to securitization of the borders. Maybe if you also want to share some insights on the use of AI for border management.
I don't have information on that. So, yes, unfortunately, I must say EU is still, so it was in the news, recent news by a joint journalist investigation, I must say, that Europe is funding 50 million euros to Turkey to build fences. So we don't have AI yet. We still are investing in barbed fences. So this is also, I think, something worth to mention. Thank you.
Juliette?
Juliet, please.
I'm sorry. Unfortunately, this is not at all my area of work, so I don't think I can provide a very valuable answer. I know that in Greece they have been collecting some data from asylum seekers, like everywhere in Europe, with the fingerprints at entry points, stuff like that. They're also taking pictures. But the use of AI at the moment, I could not answer very precisely, unfortunately.
Yes, I can touch upon this, Juliette, what you said, and the new pact also foresees a really maze of data banks about regarding collecting data from migrants and asylum seekers. So it will be really hard to follow and allocate any accountability, how this data flows and how it is used. It's a really huge maze of data flowing, what also the the EU Pact foresees.
In that regard, I will encourage maybe to check on the last reports. There have been very detailed reports of border violence monitoring network on AI used at the borders. The very last report, that it's a series of reports, the very last report was about Bulgaria. So very detailed information with fact-finding missions and statistics about devices, technologies, and systems that have been implemented, and the funding for that is increasing. As Desi shared, I think that keeping the border secure requires so much human resources that none of the nations can afford, and even the EU itself. So AI will have to be introduced more and more. And unfortunately, no AI is introduced for rescue rescue of migrants and securing their human rights. And the balance there is drastic.
And there is a question about Bulgaria particularly. I have a question concerning the legal aid to asylum seekers in Bulgaria, who provides it in the detention centers of Busmonti or Harmonli, for instance. The legal aid is provided by lawyers. We also provide legal aid to the detention centers. We have a mobile team regularly present at the detention center of Busmonti. This is the detention center close to Sofia. Mostly is provided indeed by NGOs. Unaccompanied minors, for example, according to the law, they receive a state lawyer as a special representative. As lawyers, we are entitled, and we have a legal entitlement to access the detention centers if we want to see our clients. What is concerning, it will be the logistics. Maybe we also have these examples from Greece, where screening or detention centers are scattered on the islands. So for us, logistic-wise, we want to see what will happen regarding the infrastructure. That's why it's very important to know about the national implementations plan, how this infrastructure will be built up and distributed across the country for the new EU Pact, if more infrastructure will be shifted to the borders. This is important for the NGOs which provide legal aid to know and to strategize their capacities and to know how they will access logistic-wise the facilities on the borders.
And there is a question whether AVRR and repatriation is an issue. AVRR is assisted voluntary return and reintegration programs. If any of the speakers would like to maybe tackle on assisted voluntary returns programs and the way that they are taking place in your respective national policies.
I would like to mention about regarding the voluntary return. This is something that has been, let's say, advertised quite a lot, both in Serbia and in Bosnia and Herzegovina. IOM, International Organization for Migration, and Serbian Commissariat for Refugees and Migration are conducting a voluntary return. I have to say that the numbers of people who are choosing to return back to the countries of origin is relatively low. It never goes above, it's always between 100 and 200 people per year. So it's a relatively small number of people. However, IOM is conducting regular workshops in all of the asylum centers, transit centers, and also what is quite problematic is that IOM is one of the rare organizations that has full access to detention centers in Serbia. Serbia has 3 detention centers. People who are being detained in Serbia, they're not entitled to free legal aid regarding of their position, if they're minors, families, and so on. Also, NGOs don't have full access to detention centers. You can visit a detention center only if you announce your visit a day in advance, and you have to give the name of the person, of the detainee that you will visit. And then you can only meet this one person in an isolated room. So you don't really have an overview of how many people are in detention center. You cannot speak to all of them and so on. And in practice, actually none of the NGOs go to detention centers, and people who are there, they don't have access to legal aid, they don't have access to medical care, they don't have access to psychological aid, but they do have access to IOM and to voluntary return. And actually quite significant number of these people who have chosen voluntary return are actually choosing voluntary return from detention center, which, as you know, is extremely problematic. And the big question is whether or not this is actually a voluntary return, or whether or not the person would actually choose to return to the country of origin if he or she was not being detained. So in Serbia, it's quite a big problem. And from my perspective, I think that in the future, with the new pact and the action plan, this is something that they will put even bigger focus on.
Thank you, Milica, for this last input. I think that we are very close to...
Juliet is also right.
Juliet, yes, Juliet, please.
Quickly on this topic, it's what Melissa just mentioned. The situation is extremely similar in Greece. The number of AVRR, I just checked it up online, since September 2019, from September 2019 to February 2023, it's less than 10,000 people in Greece. So it's relatively low numbers, but the same tactics as the one that Melissa just described that are being used in Greece. And the same question, is it really a voluntary return in this context? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliet. I think with this last question, we exhausted our time. I'm really grateful to all the panelists for the very professional presentations. I thank you also for the questions and the efficient discussion that we conducted with a lot of topics and issues, broad ones that were touched on. We have a lot on the plate, but also we remain with a lot of questions. and we will keep asking the questions, and we will try to provide a future platform and visibility of what is happening on the borders, and hopefully on the both sides of the borders. With that, I will close this webinar, and I will wish everyone a pleasant afternoon. Thank you once again.